This is the CineSnob Podcast.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 289 of the CineSnob Podcast. I am Jared Kingery.
I'm Cody Villafano.
Cody, it's we've been off for a couple weeks. It's the standard sort of South by Southwest break that we take here.
Mm-hmm.
You went to the festival. I didn't. Tell us about it. What did you see? Anything good? Anything really stand out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I saw. I think I saw. What was it, like 20 movies in 5 days, something like that. Which, you know, it's a little bit. Actually, that's a lie. It was a 16 movie. I don't know, whatever.
Come
Anyway,
on.
numbers don't matter. But it's a little different in that, like, you know, there's a little bit more time and space in between. There's a little bit room to breathe. There's a little bit of travel you have to do. So, like, you know, another Fantastic Fest is one we talk about here a lot, and it's you know, that's like you can get like 5 or 6 if you do like a press screening in the morning there. So
Yeah.
And that was my last in-person festival, so it felt a little bit like I was able to breathe a little bit, which is always nice. And yeah, I saw a handful of movies I think were really good. I saw an IFC movie called Ghostlight that I hope comes out here in the near future about like a man who is a construction worker who sort of like stumbles into a community theater performance of Romeo and Juliet as an actor, and he's never acted before, but he's like going through the grieving process, and so he uses it to kind of channel his grief, and that one was really good. You know, there was the sort of festival winner was a movie called Bob Trevino Likes It, which I think was a pretty decent movie. Kind of like one of those feel good festival movies. Kind of, you know, balances between being like laying the emotionality on thick, but also being authentic and you know, real. There was a documentary called Fly, which was my favorite documentary, National Geographic documentary about base jumping, specifically like wingsuit base jumpers. And it kind of follows 3 couples who are involved in base jumping and follows them through, I think, like 7 years of kind of like the escalation of their sport and stuff like that. And that was good. So yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of really solid stuff. I didn't see any like showstoppers that I would say were like incredible, amazing, but a lot of really solid stuff, and you know, only a handful of things that I thought were like outright bad.
Yeah. You didn't do any of the big movies then this year.
No, you know, I've sort of decided to kind of stay out of that unless it's like something super anticipated, because the big stuff was like, you know, Roadhouse, which we're talking about today, which was only like 2 weeks out, The Fall Guy, which is coming out in like a few weeks, I think, in like mid-April, or is it in May? I forget.
I'm not sure,
but soon enough. And then like there were some other things that were like closely approaching.
I think the Sydney Sweeney one.
Immaculate,
yeah.
Civil War also opening
yeah.
up, you know, very shortly here. So, you know, with those kind of bigger ones, like, yes, it would be cool to see with the festival audience, but, you know, it's not something where, you know, I could go see a movie that you know, like, for example, we're covering Late Night with the Devil today. I saw that a year ago at South by Southwest. And so, you know, like the idea that I could go see a movie that, you know, won't be out for another year, or I could see something that's out in 2 weeks. You know, I'm going to opt for the other. So
Right. Cool. Anything else to add before we move on?
no, the only other thing I saw was I did do comedy.
Okay. Yeah.
Comedy
Yes.
part,
Yes.
and I went to the Conan O'Brien comedy event at
Very
Essex
jealous of that.
Follies. Yeah. It was him and Robert Smigel talking a little bit about their start, not only with like Late Night with Conan O'Brien, but like the things that led them up to that point. So, you know, they started by covering their time doing like sketch comedy in Chicago, and they showed some like old like old home movie style performances of like him and Smigel and Bob Odenkirk, where they're all like, you know, like in their early 20s performing sketches that ended up, you know, being on SNL and and then stuff that didn't make it there, and then they showed like the first 15 minutes or so, the first couple of acts of the Look Well pilot, and talked a little bit about how that started and stuff. And then I was telling you about this, but there's, my favorite part of it was they had filmed this sort of like PSA style intro that was supposed to be attached to Wayne's World. And it was something that that Greg Daniels, Robert Smigel, and Conan O'Brien wrote together. And it was this PSA about like how to spend an entire day at the multiplex, but only pay once. And so like it starts with this sort of like this first joke in it is like you have to do the patented reverse helix pattern and it's just this stupid like ping ponging around to different theaters that makes no sense whatsoever. And then the PSA is like this kid with like a 50s style narrator or whatever, going through these like escalating, complicated, ridiculous, stupid like tactics to essentially sneak into the movies. And apparently like the studio or the movie theater chains like did not want it attached to Wayne's World because of even though it was like clearly a joke. And I guess like not a lot of people have seen the PSA. I looked for it to see if it was on like some kind of deleted scenes or something like that, and it's nowhere to be found. So that part felt really fun to kind of like view that stuff, and then just to see kind of Conan and Smigel just sort of reminisce. There was an appearance by Triumph, so it was, you get a little bit of
course,
Triumph in real life, which was fun. And yeah, it was long, but it was good.
Yeah, it was pretty late night, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we got out of there at about midnight.
Yeah, it's too late for me these days. I'm an old man.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, let's go ahead and move on to reviews.
Here are this week's reviews.
First up this week, we have Ghostbusters Frozen Empire.
Oh, gross.
It's the Hell's Kitchen sewer dragon.
Hold on to your ass!
TV Spangler, you stay inside this car.
I have a ghost to bust.
All right, that was cool.
Harry, come on.
No, I know, I'm sorry. It's just the way she said it. It sounded cool.
Get back in here! I can't hear you over the nuclear accelerator! On it.
This is the fourth Ghostbusters movie in the series, started in 1984. Of course, not the fourth movie total. That doesn't include 2016's Ghostbusters remake, all-female Ghostbusters. Anyway, this is the direct sequel to Afterlife, which was released in 2021. Cody, tell us about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire and what you thought of it.
Sure. So, I mean, from the perspective of just talking about nostalgia and connection to Ghostbusters, that part I'll leave to you as Ghostbusters was not very much part of my childhood or adolescence. I didn't see it for the first time until maybe like less than 10 years ago.
That's really surprising.
Yeah. So it wasn't part of that, and I haven't seen Ghostbusters 2 at all. So one could argue that I am not the right audience for these movies at all, because the first I actually watched Ghostbusters Afterlife. I finished it last night. And I held off as long as I could, but I finally watched it, and just like it just did nothing for me really. And sort of what that was essentially was a way of rebooting the franchise by connecting this family, who essentially was the daughter and grandkids of Harold Ramis's character, Egon Spengler, who and there was a way to sort of like, relaunch the franchise and also connect it to the original. And it was just sort of just, like, again, if you remove the sort of, like connection to Harold Ramis and then the cameos by, the remaining three, it's not really a Ghostbusters movie, the Afterlife. It doesn't feel that way. It's not particularly funny. It's very straightforward, sort of like family oriented, spooky type of stuff. There's nothing really to the story of the ghosts themselves. Like it just exists, right? And so the follow up here finds them back in New York, right? And I think connecting a little bit more to Ghostbusters as they've like assumed the mantle of sort of the Ghostbusters, the family, including now Paul Rudd, who is sort of the kind of like patriarchal figure of this family now. He in the last one he was the teacher, and then kind of eventually started, I guess, dating Carrie Coon's character. So we get sort of a continuation of that story. And then I think what is ultimately a greater integration of the previous Ghostbusters characters, where, they basically show up for one scene in Afterlife. And here they are a little bit more prominent and present, where, like, I think Dan Aykroyd is probably like what has like maybe like the third most screen time of any character, seemingly just appears in scenes without introducing himself. I don't know if you've noticed that either, but like there were a few scenes where there was a bunch of characters doing something and Dan Aykroyd was just there or just kind of like walked in.
Well, I mean, I think that's okay in the idea that, and like you said, you're not the audience for this because you didn't grow up on the Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
But as a Ghostbusters fan, you're going to be okay with Ray Stantz being there. But yeah, I get it. Yes. There's one scene where he's wearing sunglasses for some reason. I'm not sure why that is. But.
Yeah. So what you get with this round is, again, for me, a little bit more of the same, where it's like a nothing ghost story kind of thing, where I don't think the plot points or anything about it is particularly interesting. I mentioned before that the first one wasn't particularly funny. It was straightforward. This one is, again, for me, maybe like 10% funnier, and mostly it's due to the presence of a couple of comedic actors who get to be variations of like their version of funny. So Kumail Nanjiani is sort of a major character in the movie, and he plays kind of like a loserish kind of character, and I think you can get some laughs from that. Patton Oswalt shows up for some exposition midway through, and is funny during that. But for me, like the stuff, like the family characters are just all kind of very flat and in neutral and uninteresting. You do get a little bit of Paul Rudd getting to be funny, which, again, Paul Rudd was maybe the one comedic thread in the first movie in Afterlife. Yeah. And here I think he gets a little bit, but he's sort of relegated to like stepdad role, like very generic stepdad type characterizations. The family itself, again, I think just not a lot there. I don't know if like Finn Wolfhard was filming Stranger Things and like couldn't get away, but he is barely in this movie. After being like, a pretty major screen presence in Afterlife, doesn't even really interact with the character that he spent most of the time with in the first one. This is, talking about a movie that's a couple years old now at this point, but I really didn't get much from Carrie Coon in the first Ghostbusters either. I feel like she was kind of like a very one-dimensional character in Afterlife. And here you don't really get anything from her either. Yeah. And we're talking about like great actors who are given nothing to do. It has nothing to do with Carrie Coon or Paul Rudd, but they're just not given much to do. And really, it's McKenna Grace's movie, essentially, where she kind of takes the lead and has this story where she has this connection with a ghost that ends up kind of getting things into trouble. And then, of course, you have the sort of grander, world-threatening again, we talk about the sort of like scale of this shit all the time, and why does something have to be so threatening and not self-contained?
Well, to be
Anyway.
fair, that's what Ghostbusters has always been.
Mhm.
I'll get into it more later, but
Yeah. And so the thing just feels so piecemeal and spread out, where it's just like there's such a lack of cohesion in everything that's going on. There's a lot of like superfluous characters and storylines and D, E, and F storylines that just like don't like feel like they don't need to be there. It also like introduces new characters, which is like we already have too many to begin with. Why are we adding this British technician guy that serves no real purpose in the movie? And like a lot of it doesn't make sense just from a story wise. I messaged you earlier, but like there's a plot point where, you know, at some point they are actively the Ghostbusters, and then they find out, like, I don't know, like 20 minutes into the movie via Ernie Hudson's character, that like there's a new lab where they've been testing ghosts and testing things out, and it's got a character from the first movie already there, and like the family has no idea that this is going on, which is like they just don't know that there is this lab going on, and they are the Ghostbusters anyway. Yeah. And so again, I just kind of watch this movie with a mostly blank expression. It just does nothing for me, you know, from a sort of like family friendly horror-ish kind of thing. I don't really know that it's super effective in its scares, and presumably it's going for that sort of like spooky vibe more than it is comedy vibe. And so it's kind of like trying to have its cake and eat it too, and it's end up having like neither of those elements being particularly successful. You know, the integration of the original characters, I think it does better in terms of like keeping them a thread that runs throughout the movie. But, you know, like aside from, you know, a Bill Murray quip or two, it doesn't really kind of hit for me. But again, I'm not the right audience because I don't have that same kind of nostalgia factor. But I think if you removed the sort of like connective thread of nostalgia from this, it's such a nothing movie in a nothing kind of story, like a dime a dozen sort of like ghost hunting kind of movie. So and then of course, like when you have the nostalgia factor like be kind of weakened or diluted, I think that it ends up being even worse as a result.
Well, okay. I mean, so yeah, I'm clearly a Ghostbusters fan. There's 8 Ghostbusters action figures on the wall in front of me, and there's a giant Slimer behind me. So I was the right age for this thing to hit in 1984. You know, I've seen that movie. I love the first movie quite a bit. It's one of those kind of rewatchable 80s comedies that really appealed to kids as opposed to, you know, stuff like Beverly Hills Cop or Trading Places or anything like that that's a little more kind of adult themed. This one was obviously very kid friendly because there's a cartoon series, there was a serial, both of which are referenced in this film. And to maximize the nostalgia, I guess, for people my age, you mentioned Afterlife. It's a movie we didn't cover on this podcast when it came out. I was not a fan of Afterlife. It's very so. I think other than the obvious casting of Finn Wolfhard, you mentioned the movie trying to be this sort of sincere like family adventure. It feels very much like it took a page from the Stranger Things playbook, where like these spooky things are happening in this town and the kids are the only one that can figure it out. Not my favorite approach to a Ghostbusters thing. I do think that the movie Afterlife is a little successful on its own, being its own thing for a while, but once it starts to really pile on the nostalgia bait, and then in the third act when it just goes off the fucking rails with it, I think it ultimately sputters out, and I was not a fan. This movie at least tries to be a Ghostbusters movie in that it's back in New York. It's pretty much a straightforward comedy, excuse me, where Afterlife was barely funny at all. As you mentioned, I think Paul Rudd is the only comedic element in that movie, and everything else is played really, really straight. Um, you know, this is kind of the worst example of of people my age like wanting to hold on to these things from their youth, and I'm 100% guilty. I mean, just fucking look behind me of being in that audience. But man, this movie just has nothing new to say or do, and it's you mentioned it does like it's piecemeal. It's literally like they kept the characters from Afterlife and put them in this story that they have no business being in.
Right.
Like, why is this? Go ahead.
Well, especially when the last one takes place in Oklahoma, and
Yeah.
like in that movie, that could have stayed there, and now you have to give
Right.
all of these characters reasons to be there, and you're kind of
Right.
shoehorning the whole thing.
Like, if you want to make a new Ghostbusters movie with new Ghostbusters, do that. I mean, that's what 2016 tried to do, except being outside of the story element or outside the original story's element. But shit, like, why did this family of rubes, two of them were children, become the Ghostbusters in New York? Other than they were in the last movie, so they have to be in this movie. So it makes no fucking sense to start with. Second, we get the Avengerification of everything, with Ernie Hudson being the sort of Nick Fury character, which the character of Winston was written in the first film to be like this guy who was just in it for the paycheck. Like, he literally says that in the movie. And now he's like the fucking mastermind genius behind all of this Ghost Lab stuff. It's just fan wanky bullshit that I can't get behind anymore, man. I can't do it. It's just, it makes no sense to the story, and it really hampers what could have been a decent adventure. Like I was telling you, like, I think Kumail Nanjiani is what should have been the through line for the entire movie. Like, here, this artifact is awakened, and here's this guy who may or may not be the key to protecting everyone in New York. The stuff with McKenna Grace's character, developing a friendship and sort of hinted at relationship with this ghost, does nothing except have the character make the stupidest decision possible in the film,
Right.
which I don't even understand how that got to that. Like, it feels like there's a scene or two missing from there. And then you're left at the climax where you have to work in the old Ghostbusters, which Winston, the character of Winston, I don't like what they did with it. Bill Murray is on autopilot in this thing,
as he was in Afterlife.
As in Afterlife. I believe it or not, I think Dan Aykroyd adds a lot to this movie. He's clearly having fun. He's in it. He's present, and he's doing the thing that he did in the first films. I think he's the only welcome addition of the old Ghostbusters to this thing, and the only one that makes sense being part of it. But then by the end of the climax of the film, you have all of these characters to fucking deal with. I believe there's 11 or 12 good guys at the end of the movie that you have to keep track of.
Yeah,
in the climax. I don't know. It's too much. It's just too much. It's too rushed. It's not. It doesn't make enough sense. It's at least funnier than Afterlife, because Afterlife was sort of this maudlin bullshit that you get with these things where somebody dies. In this case, Harold Ramis dies, and everything becomes like this weird tribute to him, when it makes no sense for the character. It made no sense for his character to move to Oklahoma and have this secret family that no one knew about. The idea that, so if you're not familiar with the first, like after the first film, the second film picks up and the Ghostbusters are disbanded because they were sued by the city and all kinds of businesses because everybody thought it was a big con. And then when Afterlife, the third canonical movie in this series, picks up, like, the Ghostbusters have been nothing forever. But then the fourth movie, like, Winston was developing the secret ghost lab the entire time. Like, it's just a bunch of shit that doesn't fit with the spirit of the original movie. And I get it. It's a product now, but fuck, man. If we're going to keep making Ghostbusters movies, like, if this is what we're going to get, like, I would just as soon fucking stop.
Yeah, I mean, like, should they just stop? Like, I mean, that's the question, is like, because like you presumably you're not going to get a Ghostbusters movie with these three old guys just sort of,
And I don't want that.
Right. So like, what do you do? Do you fresh reboot from? Because I mean, like, you can't follow this boring ass family for a third movie,
Right.
with like nothing interesting going on. So like, if the franchise is to be kept alive, like you got to sever the ties to the original, right? Like that's the only way to do it, because if you keep on tying it to this nostalgia, you get this thing that has this constant pull towards the nostalgia. That's like, that as fun as it might be to see Dan Aykroyd doing this, is like holding it back from at least being its own thing.
I wouldn't mind Dan Aykroyd hanging around like that. I wouldn't mind it, whatever. My biggest issue with this movie is that it wasn't like, I believe, and maybe I'm wrong here, I think that after Afterlife, so there's a post-credit scene of Afterlife where in Afterlife when Winston like opens up the firehouse again, whatever. I believe the initial plan was to have a separate film take place there, and it was something called Ghostbusters Firehouse was the working title, which would have been a separate group of Ghostbusters. Maybe I'm pulling this entirely out of my ass, but I believe this was a rumor at least at one time, which would have been preferable to this. Like, hey, these people, like the threat is back, so we revive the team, but with new people, which is probably what the 2016 reboot should have been. Maybe people would have been a little more satisfied with it. But because it was its own thing, I think it hamstrung it initially. But man, like you said, we can't keep following this fucking and I like the actors, Carrie Coon and Paul Rudd are great, but they're given nothing to fucking do. Like you said, Finn Wolfhard was on set for 3 days, maybe. I don't know. McKenna Grace, they turned into like this sad character that makes dumb decisions. And look, it makes no sense. And it's not fun. Like, yeah, there's some winks and stuff here and there. And I think, like you said, Kumail is funny. Patton Oswalt's funny. I like Dan Aykroyd in this. I really do. But fuck, man, I can't do like this is a big nothing. This is just a big like circle jerk of nostalgia that I can't get behind. I'm done getting behind shit like that. Anyway, what's your grade? Oh, go ahead.
And I just checked. I did look at the sort of Firehouse thing, and it's nothing. It's nothing different. It was just the working title for the sequel.
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I was wrong then. But
yeah, because once sort of Jason Reitman was interviewed about it, he said it was the next chapter in the Spangler family story. So.
Oh. Yeah. Anyway, I mean, it would be better served for them to move on to something else, but. I don't know if this makes enough money. I know it opened okay. We're probably still going to see shit like this. But what's your grade for Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, Cody?
I give it a C. For me, just like nothing really there. It's not unwatchable. I think there are moments of just like I didn't laugh out loud at any point. I gave a slight.
You didn't lull? No lulling?
I didn't lull. I smirked a couple of times, but for me, just sort of DOA, not really interesting. And like the one thing I think that can carry a little bit of this is the nostalgia, and I just don't have it. So, admittedly, might not be the right audience for it, but still, as its own thing, it doesn't work.
I mean, I'm giving it a C also, but I have seen a lot of my. Kind of nostalgia-driven friends and other follows on Instagram just kind of treat it as a warm hug. Yeah. And I get it.
But these warm hugs cannot be excuses for.
No, I know
bad movies.
I totally agree. But I mean, a lot of people, it's just what they want. They just want to see these old men put on jumpsuits again and fight ghosts, and I guess it gives you that. But yeah, C for me. Let's move on to our next movie, Late Night with the Devil.
About a month ago, a manuscript happened to cross my desk that, well, I haven't been able to stop thinking about, quite frankly. The book. Conversations with the Devil by Dr. June Ross Mitchell. Hits shelves this week. And it is certain to challenge more than a few skeptics out there. Now, before I bring on the doctor and the young subject of the book, wanted to share with you all a clip produced by June's Sci Research Center. Hopefully catch us all up to speed. But please be warned, anyone with young children in the room, what you're about to see is profoundly disturbing and shocking. Can we roll the tape, please?
Oh, hey. Sorry, I forgot. I forgot it didn't go to the tape. This is a sort of a found footage horror film starring David Desmalchin. You mentioned you saw this at South by Southwest last year. It was just released by Shudder IFC. Cody, tell us about Late Night with the Devil and what you thought of it.
Yeah, so like you said, it is a sort of found footage idea where the idea of the story is that it surrounds this fictional late night talk show called Night Owls, and it takes place in the 70s, where essentially the character that David Desmalchin plays is Jack Delroy, and he was basically head to head in Johnny Carson's biggest competitor in this world, and eventually like started to like lose his audience. And so in an effort to try to like pop a number or pop a rating, he decided to one night on Halloween in 1977, I think it is, like basically conjure the devil on live TV. And so what you're presented with essentially is like the movie is supposed to serve as like a documentary style thing of here it like we found the master tapes for what went on air that day, and in addition to the master tapes you're going to see never before seen behind the scene footage of what happened that night, and then it kind of throws you into this performance or not this performance but this episode of Night Owls, right, that you saw. So it's a really cool idea. I mean, I think it's this idea where you're essentially watching an entire episode of a late night television show, and then in the breaks you're getting, like behind the scenes footage. Now, I think I'm going to talk a lot about things here that's going to sound nitpicky, but I just want to preface this by overall saying, like, I think this movie's really effective in a number of different ways, and like it's a really big swing, and I appreciate like what they went for here, even if the execution doesn't work 100%. But we'll talk about the good. I really like the construct of this sort of like late night television show. It feels, at least moderately authentic with, having starting off with a monologue that leads into the guests, that leads into, these sort of like, performance pieces. And I think it starts and ends with a really good performance by David Desmalchin, who previously has been, a character actor who has gotten a lot more work in the recent years. It's nice to see him not playing like a total freak or pedophile or like everything that he's been sort of like typecasted as over the course of, because he was like in Prisoners, right? He was the
he was in Prisoners. Obviously was in
he's in
Ant-Man.
the Dark Knight.
Dark Knight. He's barely in the Dark Knight, but then he was in
but he plays a lunatic.
Yes, he was in the first two Ant-Man films. He was in the first Dune. You've seen him 10,000 places. Suicide Squad, probably his most visible, biggest role was as the Polka Dot Man. I interviewed him for a movie called Animals at South by.
That's right.
Ago.
Yeah. And it's probably his I assume his biggest role to date, and I think he does a really good job. I mean, I think he's believable as a talk show host. I think he's believable as like a charismatic host character, and so you get again this television performance, and again I like it commits pretty hard to the construct of the movie, which is like you're watching this master tape and then you're getting the behind the scenes footage. Now the behind the scenes footage stuff is a little bit like not believable in its style, whereas I think that the 70s style looks pretty good when you're watching it as like the episode of Night Owls. But it's like it's like the handheld documentary style. They don't do a great job of like it seeming like it's a hidden camera. It's pretty out in the open. But I think those scenes are necessary to help build tension and round out the story. And so it didn't bother me that it broke format in those elements because I think it's good. It serves a purpose. The other thing that I really like is sort of like its escalation of events. It starts off where they have sort of like a psychic medium on the show, where, it kind of, you can kind of tell like it might be bullshit. And then like it kind of escalates from that moment forward. The thing I really like about how the story plays out is how they have the next guest essentially be a skeptic, right? A skeptic, essentially like a paranormal skeptic who is like offering money to anyone who can like prove without a shadow of a doubt that what they're experiencing is real and not, theatrics, right?
Yeah, that's a very it's a take on you ever heard of James Randi?
Mm-hmm.
That was his thing. He was like a major skeptic that would, I think it was maybe it was like the Kreskin guy, the spoonbender. Yeah, I think that was what spawned it. But yeah, it's a very familiar late night trope too, if you're familiar
Yeah.
with that.
And I think the inclusion of it really helps the story kind of escalate into what ends up being the next guest, which is a girl who essentially was the last survivor of a satanic cult, in this sort of like doctor, psychologist, whatever you want to call it, who is took her under her guardianship and is sort of like helping treat her, but the idea is that there is some kind of demon that lives within this girl, right? And so essentially, in order to try to again get ratings, they try to conjure that demon, and then that's when like everything escalates and moves forward. And I have to say, up until and including that sort of like demon conjuring scene, I am like 100% on board. I really like the escalation of events. I think it's that conjuring scene is like really effective, and it's sort of like unsettling creepiness. And I think again, like I said, everything up until that point is really working, and everything up until this point is like committed to this bit of like, this is a found footage movie. This is this master tape of everything, and I just I think it's like singing at this point. But then we get into like the third act, and I think in the third act the movie starts to fall apart a little bit, where it's like it's really committed to this found footage idea until it's kind of not, where we sort of get another event that happens involving like the skeptic character, and it sort of like stops, like the sort of rules and lines of the found footage start to become a little bit blurred. And I think it sort of like pulls its punches and kind of like removes itself from the construct of the movie, because then it gets into this like final piece, which like if you want to give the benefit of the doubt to part of what's happening here, like I was talking to you about I don't want to spoil it, but like I was talking to you about the logic of what it's supposed to be, once there's like a I don't even want to give the detail because I think it should be watched, but like that is when it pulls me out of the movie a little bit, where I'm like, wait a minute, I thought I'm supposed to be watching like this found footage thing. And then in the final bit, you're like, okay, none of this makes sense as like footage that would have been actually captured that night. And it stops being that. And as a result, even though there's like a really great like scene of chaos that happens towards the end, which I think is super creepy and super effective and like really disturbing, the third act of the movie really kind of pulled me out of this very immersive experience, which I think is what it is, right? When you're watching this, you kind of settle into this idea that, oh, I'm watching this late night television show, and it feels authentic. And I just feel like the third act is a little bit flimsy in its commitment to the found footage idea, and its execution of logic, and then it's just sort of execution of the story itself. So it's a really great effort. And I think the first 2/3 of the movie are fantastic. And I think there are elements of the third act that do work and are effective, but I don't know that it entirely sticks the landing.
Yeah, I'm going to basically agree with you all the way. I think that it's, it immediately draws in mind the comparison to the Larry Sanders Show, which I don't remember if you've watched at all.
I've seen like a season or two. I haven't seen the whole thing.
It's you know, a kind of forgotten, not all the way forgotten, but one of those early like risk taking documentary style. I don't know what you would call it. Not documentary style, but it really played with the format of like the late night show. Like the part you see on TV was like a TV broadcast, like it's video. And then whenever they would cut to commercial, go behind the scenes, it was this handheld film look. And that's what this movie is really. I guess the concept is basically the same thing. Like you said, though, I don't think that it necessarily totally achieves that found footage look the entire way. And I've talked to you about this too. I'm a little biased because I've worked in TV for so long, and I'm like, this is not how they'd ever structure this live TV production, but I can overlook that enough. I think the one thing it maybe is a little too guilty of in breaking the conceit of being this found footage thing is a bit it's a bit over the top at certain points, like performances. The guy who plays the skeptic, I think everybody's an Australian actor except for David Desmalchin, so I don't know if that's anybody's here seen, or anybody in the United States has seen fairly often. But the guy that plays the skeptic is pretty broad at times, and you know I like the character of the medium at the beginning. Again, I think that some of that stuff though it comes across a little too over the top for this to kind of fit into the idea that you're going to believe that you're watching this real late night broadcast, which I don't know how much the movie's banking on that. I presume it not much, but it works well, I think, as a storytelling device. I don't think so much in the execution, like making you really, really believe you're watching something that was dug up somewhere. I agree. The third act kind of leans a little bit toward being not all the way sketched out. I do like that it doesn't explicitly spell out what happens. There's enough hints at the beginning, I think, to kind of get you where you need to be. That said, I think Desmalchin is really great. This is probably his biggest role, mainstream role to date. And I think he does a really good job. I mean, he's a character actor by trade, I guess, but he, as this kind of 70s style late night host with a lot of personal baggage, I think he does really well. I think another like the producer character, I think isn't great. Like it's a little too much. But I think overall it's really effective. I don't want to talk anymore about it, really give anything away, but it's there's a lot of really effective scares in here. I think there's some that are genuinely disturbing. I think my favorite character is the guy that plays the sidekick. I think that's pitch perfect.
Yeah, it's really good.
But yeah, I think ultimately really well done, and with a few problems here and there. And I think again, it does sound a little nitpicky to say, it doesn't quite nail that aesthetic that I think it really wants to, but I think the movie doesn't depend on that.
Yeah.
What's your grade for Late Night with the Devil, Cody?
Yeah, so I'm giving it a B. I mean, I think all things considered, it's really effective, and I think it's really creative and impressive, and it's just a great idea that the execution is like most of the way there. I think in its best moments, this movie is like really compelling. I think again, like maybe like the first hour, 45 minutes to an hour are really great. It's only in the third act where it starts to fall apart a little bit. I still think that it's a net positive, and I would probably just go into this movie as cold as possible too. I think the less you know, the better about everything. But all things considered, like a really great effort. I'm curious to see what these guys do in the future, so I'm giving it a B.
Yeah, B for me as well. I'm also really curious if this leads to like more bigger roles for Desmalchin, because I mean he's been in huge blockbusters the last decade. Does he finally get some sort of starring role in something that is a bigger production? Because I think he's really good. I think he's really good in this. Anyway, that's Late Night with the Devil. Last movie, Roadhouse.
Before we start, do you have insurance?
What?
Your coverage good? Like, you have dental?
Oh, haha.
Is there a hospital nearby? Is it, like, too far?
About like 25 minutes, I'd say.
I just slapped you. Are you all right?
What?
So you like to fight? You ever win?
No one ever wins a fight.
This ain't the Holiday Inn, pal.
I'm moving.
A friend of mine suggested I come talk to you. I own a roadhouse out in the Florida Keys. Lately, it's been attracting the wrong clientele. I can pay you good money. Judging by your car, you need this.
Well, I like my car.
Think about it.
I know who you are. Elwood Dalton. Big fan, man.
That guy's got a knife under his shirt. You just take a big step back and pop me in the face. You can do it.
This is a remake of the 1989 Patrick Swayze sort of grand opus of cheese action films from that era. This time starring Jake Gyllenhaal. Cody, tell us about Roadhouse. What you thought of it?
Sure. Well, I'll preface by telling on myself a little bit and say that I have not seen the original Roadhouse. I only had time this week to catch up with one movie, and it was either watching Ghostbusters Afterlife or watching the original Roadhouse. So,
I'm not terribly fresh on it, but
yeah,
I mean it's not a good movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean it's iconic in the kind of all the stuff that came together, like the mulleted Patrick Swayze and the what's his name, Sam Elliott, and I mean just it's the double deuce and cooling and all kinds of just crazy shit like that. That made for this. I wouldn't call it I wouldn't call it a good movie, but it is a compelling action cheeseball. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so the sort of idea behind this movie is it's the main character that Jake Gyllenhaal plays is a former UFC fighter who has had some incident that we don't realize until the end, and he is basically hired to I guess do the same thing, right? Be a cooler at a bar in Florida.
He's not. They don't call him a cooler, but
that's essentially
the same
what
idea.
He is, right? Like, yeah. So breaking up fights and like throwing people out and presumably just to kind of keep the riffraff out of this bar. But what we see here is like it's actually a deeper story that has a deeper sort of like criminal underground idea that's more nefarious that he must now kind of like find himself in the middle of and work itself out. So again, like I said, I don't know if there's any sort of nostalgic references or anything like that here because I have not seen the original, so I'm just going to talk about it as is. And I think
look, let me just let me preface it. Like the bones of this are like the basic idea is the same, but nothing else.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. So you get Jake Gyllenhaal in this sort of like beefed up role where he's playing a former UFC fighter. Who is like I think like maybe a little bit too quippy for his own good. I don't know that the sort of quips of this character really make sense or track. I think considering the sort of dramatic weight of its backstory, like we get like almost nothing from it when it seems like a pretty monumental, kind of thing. We mostly see things in like flashbacks. And I think the thing I can say about this movie, which I guess you can take or leave, is that for me, this is the most like 80s feeling movie I've watched in a while. like it actually feels like this movie could have been pulled from like 1985. Like it's cheesy, it's corny, it's got like the added stuff about like it brings in like an actual UFC fighter in the cast, which I'll talk about in a minute. The plotting of it is very sort of like by the numbers action movie type stuff. You have this sort of like boilerplate evil kind of people. You've got the action sequences. You've got like machismo like oozing out of this thing of like bar fights and stuff like that. So for me, it just feels like a relic of the 80s, which if that's what they're going for, then like they accomplished that goal. Now, is it effective? I don't know. I mean, I don't think that it's like a terrible movie. I think that like some of the action sequences are interesting, though. I think for like having your background guy be like a UFC fighter, it's really just mostly punching people in the face. Like it's not, there's no real grappling or submissions or anything like that. So it's weird to have him be that kind of background. But anyway, where it kind of doesn't work, I think, is like, I mean, I think it's weird that like I said, the UFC tie-in is weird, which brings into like Conor McGregor being in the cast, who I think is like not good. I don't think he's got a really thick Irish accent to begin with, but I think at times unintelligible. And it's also weird that like this movie exists in a universe where UFC is a thing, but Conor McGregor is playing a separate character, which messes with the sort of logic of it all.
I don't follow the fighting men, so I have no bearing
yeah.
on that.
He's a UFC fighter.
I know who he is. I just
So, and then the other thing too is like this movie, like the director Doug Liman is not doing press for the movie because apparently this was supposed to be theatrical and Amazon decided to just put it out on Prime. So he's sort of like boycotting the press of it all. So like he didn't even do the Q&A at South by Southwest, apparently. Like he just stayed in his seat. The movie sort of looks surprisingly janky from like a CGI perspective, where like there's like some really terrible looking shots in there, and I kind of wonder if this movie would have been ripped apart as a theatrical release, if you would have been able to see that blown up on the green screen. But like for me watching it at home, like it did not look great in certain parts of it, especially stuff that was happening like on the water, in boats, I think doesn't look great. But yeah, I mean, the movie is fine. It's not terrible, but it's not that great. It's too long. It's like a solid 2 hours. It's not really much of a character study because it keeps the character of Dalton at a distance for the most part. We get like a little bit behind like what happened that led him to here, but almost nothing about how it's affected him other than like it's made him afraid of his own rage. And like that's about that's the one element of depth that we get here. There's a relationship plotline that I think doesn't ever really feel like it's authentic. Like I don't really feel the connection between the two characters. You get sort of like a slightly comedic role from Jessica Williams, who's playing the owner of the bar. But yeah, I just don't know that it ever it clearly wants to be funny, but I don't know that the tone ever works. Like you've got one of the characters who's like literally exists as comic relief, the one who's like the part of the gang, the biker gang. Jake Gyllenhaal is like giving quips in the middle of fights. You have Jessica Williams, who again is like constantly making jokes. It's just weird that like everyone is quippy in this universe that feels like it's like super serious in the surroundings of what's going on. So I don't know, a mixed bag for me. Like I said, not terrible, but I can't say that I enjoyed it necessarily.
I'm going to disagree somewhat. I had a much better time watching this. I didn't quite notice any bad special effects. It looked like a Doug Liman movie to me, just sort of really kinetic. I do wonder though, like, did Amazon make the wrong decision here by releasing this to just to Prime? Because this is a high profile remake. This is not some like cheeseball action movie, like that would go straight to streaming as typical. Like this is something that has the brand recognition of Roadhouse, and I wouldn't say Gyllenhaal is a like a big star, but he's pretty high profile. I don't know. I mean, I feel like, there's a hunger for these things now. If you look back at something like Top Gun Maverick, which is from the same era and obviously has a different caliber star and different appeal to it than Roadhouse did, but like also like John Wick, I think better made films than this Roadhouse remake, but they found an audience, and I'm curious why Amazon didn't try to at least release this a little bit, just if they were going to have it live on their platform anyway. Like I feel like there would have been some sort of audience for this, at least people wanting to check it out. And I do think it's effective in certain points. I like the quippy Gyllenhaal. I like that he's sort of always smirking. I don't mind the idea that they live in this world where everybody kind of has a wisecrack. I think the film really only bogs down when it tries to get into the backstory as to why this is all fucking happening.
Mm-hmm.
And Gyllenhaal's sort of tragic backstory is just only mildly sketched in. I don't know that we really needed to know a lot about him anyway. That said, I had fun with it. I was prepared to kind of shrug this off as another unnecessary remake, but I think it can live on its own as it is. I mean, if it wasn't called Roadhouse, people would call it a ripoff of Roadhouse, but I mean, it's the same, it's the same spirit. The original is no unassailable classic. It's a cheesy ass 80s action film that happened to become a cult classic. And I don't think this one does any disservice to that. I think it exists fine. I like the original Roadhouse was in like some bumfuck Missouri town. This is like a beach setting, Florida Keys, bunch of dirtbags there. I like that change of scenery. I think it looks really good at certain points. Maybe my TV is not as big as yours and I didn't see the flaws as much, but I don't know. I dug it. I wouldn't say it's essential viewing or anything, but for something that was, that most people are probably writing off as a remake of a film that most people see fondly as a cult classic. It fucking premiered at South by Southwest. I don't know why they decided to bury this on Prime. Not that it's buried, it's on the front page, but what's the viewership like on Prime? I have no idea, but I don't know. I had a good time with it, and I think it deserved a little more than it got. Maybe it would have been a hit. Maybe this would have been like one of those R-rated action movies that breaks through. I don't know. But I don't really have a lot to complain about other than, it's not, it is probably too long at 2 hours. And I do think the Conor McGregor character is a little bit too insane for the film. I think he feels like he belongs in a Fast and Furious movie as opposed to this film. But
that is true.
Anyway, what's your grade for Roadhouse, Cody?
Yeah, for me it's a C+. I can't recommend it. Like I said, it's not terrible. I didn't hate it necessarily, but for me, there's not enough in it that works. I do agree where I think that this could have made money at the box office, and I don't really know why. Like it doesn't have the feel of a streaming movie, especially when it has like a pretty bankable star at the lead of it. It's got the nostalgia factor. I think and like I said, it feels like an 80s movie to me. So I feel like there's definitely a market for just like dumb action. And so I don't know why, there's an entire generation of people who grew up on shit like this, and I don't know why they couldn't think that they would make some money off of it.
Case in point, fucking Ghostbusters. Like it's nothing but nostalgia. Anyway, I'm giving this a B-. I can recommend it. I think it's got some issues that are mild, but ultimately I had a good time. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it way more than I thought I was going to. And I'm no huge fan of the original film, so it was nice. I had a good time. That's going to do it for this week, Cody. I have no idea what's coming up next.
Next week is Godzilla X Kong, the New Empire.
Oh, wow. Do I even have a screening for that? I don't know.
Shockingly, we in San Antonio do.
Wow, look
IMAX.
at you. Oh, wow. It's Godzilla X Kong. Yeah. I'm not looking forward to that one.
Nope.
I haven't liked any of those movies except for the first Godzilla.
That's one more than me.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know.
I mean, I think the closest thing I had come to liking something is the TV show, which I haven't even finished, but I watched 3 or 4 episodes and I thought it was pretty good.
I've heard nothing but good things. So,
but yeah, so it's following in the series of the Godzilla, sort of like that was like the Bryan Cranston, Aaron Taylor Johnson.
Yeah, the Gareth Edwards movie.
Gareth Edwards, and then Kong. Skull
Island
was the first, and then Godzilla, King of the Monsters.
Yeah,
was there a second Kong? Oh,
Godzilla. Yeah, was it Godzilla
versus
whatever
Kong, right?
whatever it was called?
That movie sucked ass.
They've all sucked. They've all sucked. But that I think Destroy All Monsters was, or not Destroy All Monsters. King of the Monsters was the worst as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess like people did. I mean, if you look at Rotten Tomatoes, like Godzilla versus Kong was 76% on Rotten Tomatoes. Kong Skull Island was 75%. Godzilla 2014 was 76%. So like,
yeah.
But like, I think both of us have like really not been into these movies at all. But
yeah, well. That's coming out, so we'll take care of that. If you want to reach us, you can email us at podcast@cinesnob.net. Find us on Twitter @CineSnob, Facebook CineSnobNet, YouTube.com/CineSnob. Anything else, Cody, before we wrap this bad boy up?
No, I don't think so. It was a nice to do 3 movies again. It's been a while since we've done like a full blown episode. So
yeah. All right. On that note, I'm Jared Kingery.
I'm Cody Villafania.
Thank you for listening to the CineSnob podcast. To read reviews, interviews, and more, visit cinesnob.net. See you next week.